They say the dead can't follow you home. I used to believe that, till the night something invisible walked straight through my bedroom door. I grew up in a quiet town in Vermont, tucked between rolling forests and endless stretches of farmland. People around there didn't really talk much about ghosts. They talked about deer season, local fairs, and who was getting married that summer. But my family's farmhouse had always carried a reputation. Whispers that I had grown up hearing, but never truly listened to. The kind of whispers you chalk up to superstition. Until I was 17. That was when I learned the hard way that some places don't let their past rest. Our house had been built in the late 1800s, and the locals called it the Fenwick Place. Nobody ever explained why, but they said people didn't last long living there. My parents bought it cheap when I was 6. I never thought much of it. To me, it was just home. Creaky floors, drafty windows, and the faint smell of damp earth in the cellar. But there was always a feeling, even when I was a kid, that the house was watching. Not just empty and still, but aware. The first real moment I felt something was off happened one November evening. My parents had gone to visit friends across town, and I stayed behind, claiming homework as an excuse. The sun had set early, and the house was unusually quiet. I remember sitting in the living room, the old clock ticking steadily on the wall, when I heard what sounded like footsteps upstairs. At first, I thought it was just the settling of the wood. Old houses groan all the time. But these weren't groans. They were distinct, measured steps, slow and deliberate, crossing the length of my bedroom above. I froze, the pencil in my hand still hovering over my notebook. The air felt suddenly colder, as though the heat had been sucked out of the room. I tried calling out. "Hello?" My voice cracked a little. Nothing answered. No movement, no sound, just the echo of my own voice bouncing down the empty hallway. Against my better judgment, I climbed the stairs. Each step felt heavier than the last. My bedroom door was closed, just as I'd left it, but I could swear I'd heard the footsteps end right at the door. I turned the knob and pushed it open slowly. The room was empty, nothing disturbed, nothing out of place. But then I noticed it. The faint scent of cigar smoke lingering in the air. My family didn't smoke, and I knew that smell didn't come from outside. It was thick, like someone had been standing right there a moment ago. My stomach tightened, and I backed out of the room, shutting the door firmly behind me. For weeks after that, little things started happening. I'd hear muffled voices when no one was home. Doors would creak open in the middle of the night, as though pushed by an unseen hand. Sometimes I'd wake up to find objects moved. A book shifted across the table, a chair pulled slightly away from the desk. "It's just the house settling," my dad said. "That place has a mind of its own." He laughed, but there was something uneasy in his tone, like maybe he'd noticed things too. One night in December, I woke up to the sound of whispering. At first, I thought it was my parents downstairs, but the whispers were coming from inside my room. My heart pounded as I sat up, straining to hear. It wasn't English. It sounded like fragmented mutters, low and urgent, as though two people were having a heated conversation right beside my bed. I turned on my lamp and the whispers stopped immediately. My room was empty, shadows stretching across the walls, the scent of smoke faintly hanging in the air again. I didn't sleep that night. I lay awake, every muscle tense, listening for any sign that it would start again. Things escalated quickly after that. 2 weeks later, I was getting ready for bed when the door to my room slammed shut with enough force to rattle the windows. I leaped back, my breath catching in my throat. The knob twisted violently, back and forth, as though someone on the other side was trying to get in, or keep me from leaving. I shouted for my parents, but the sound died in my throat, choked off by sheer terror. Finally, after what felt like forever, the knob went still. The silence that followed was worse than the noise. I didn't sleep in that room for the next 3 nights. I camped out on the couch, telling my parents it was just more old house issues, but deep down, I knew better. Something was in that house with us, something that wanted to make itself known. The breaking point came in January. I remember it vividly because it was snowing hard that night, thick flakes falling against the windows like tiny fists. The power had gone out, and we were all sitting in the living room by candlelight. My mom suggested telling ghost stories to pass the time, which was ironic given the circumstances. I stayed quiet, trying to ignore the creeping unease that had been gnawing at me for weeks. At one point, my dad went to the kitchen to fetch more candles. A minute later, we heard him call out, "Did you just walk past me?" My mom looked confused. "No, we've been sitting here." My dad came back into the room, pale as the snow outside. "I swear," he said, "I just saw a man walk by the doorway, tall, wearing a dark coat. I thought it was you, Alex." He looked at me, and my stomach dropped. That was the first time my parents stopped brushing it off. Later that night, when the power finally returned, I went upstairs to grab a blanket. As I passed the bathroom, I saw something that still makes my blood run cold. In the fogged-up mirror above the sink, there was a handprint, clear, fresh, as though someone had pressed their palm against the glass just seconds ago, only the bathroom was ice cold. There was no steam, no heat, nothing that could have caused condensation. And the handprint was bigger than mine, bigger than my dad's too. That was the night I realized we weren't alone in that house. Whatever it was, it wanted us to know it was there. I tried convincing myself that what I'd seen on the bathroom mirror could be explained. Maybe it was a trick of the light, maybe an old smudge left behind by one of us. But deep down, I knew I was lying to myself. There was no mistaking how fresh that handprint had looked. How unnatural it felt standing in that cold bathroom with a mark that shouldn't exist. Over the following weeks, whatever lived in our house began to grow bolder. It wasn't content with subtle whispers or footsteps anymore. It wanted attention, and it made sure it got mine. It started with the knocking. Always at night, always 3 sharp raps. Sometimes on my bedroom wall, sometimes at the foot of the stairs. The sound echoed through the silence of the house, deliberate and steady. When I finally worked up the courage to knock back, there was always a pause. And then 3 knocks in return, louder than mine, like something mocking me. The smell of cigar smoke came more often too. I'd wake in the middle of the night, my room filled with that acrid scent, so thick it burned the back of my throat. Once, I opened my eyes and swore I saw the faint glow of an ember in the corner, like someone holding a lit cigar in the darkness. But when I blinked, it was gone. I started dreading nighttime. Sleep became impossible. My grades slipped. I was constantly exhausted, and my parents began to worry. They wanted to believe it was stress or imagination. But after what my dad had seen that night by candlelight, I knew they weren't so sure anymore. Then came the incident with the attic. Our attic was the kind you see in horror movies. Steep, narrow stairs that creaked under every step, with a low ceiling and wooden beams blackened with age. We rarely went up there except to store boxes. One Saturday afternoon, my mom asked me to grab a box of old photo albums. Reluctantly, I climbed the stairs, flashlight in hand since the single bulb up there had burned out weeks before. As soon as I reached the top, I felt it. The air was icy, my breath visible in the beam of the flashlight. The silence pressed against my ears. I moved slowly, trying to remember where we'd stored the albums. That's when I heard it. A low, guttural hum, almost like a man trying to speak, but never forming words. I froze, shining the flashlight across the beams and boxes. Nothing. The hum grew louder, closer, vibrating in my chest. I wanted to run, but my legs locked. Then, from the corner of the attic, I saw movement. A shadow darker than the dark, pulling itself along the wall, stretching unnaturally long. The hum deepened into a rasping growl. That broke me. I dropped the flashlight and bolted down the stairs, the beam bouncing wildly until it clattered to the floor. My mom was startled by the look on my face when I burst into the kitchen. I told her I couldn't go back up there, that something was wrong. She went up herself, of course, only to return minutes later with the albums, rolling her eyes. "Nothing up there but boxes," she said. But her hands were shaking, and she wouldn't look me in the eye. That night, the attic door slammed shut on its own. The house felt charged after that, as though whatever was there had been waiting for me to acknowledge it. Now that I had, it followed me everywhere. The whispers returned, but louder. Sometimes so loud, I thought I'd gone mad. My name spoken from just behind me, breath hot on my ear, though when I spun around the room was empty. One night in February, I finally saw it. I woke around 3 a.m., a time people like to call the witching hour, though I'd never thought much of it before. My room was freezing, so cold I could see the vapor of my breath. The smell of smoke was overwhelming, making my eyes water. I sat up, heart racing, and that's when I noticed the figure. At first, I thought it was just a shadow cast by the moonlight through my window. But shadows don't move like that. Shadows don't step forward. It was tall, broader than any man I'd ever seen, with its head brushing the ceiling. The outline was human, but wrong. Its shoulders too sharp, its arms too long. And in the blackness where a face should have been, 2 pinpricks of red light glowed, steady and unblinking. I couldn't scream, couldn't breathe. It just stood there, inches from my bed, watching. The air around me pressed heavy against my chest. Then it leaned closer. I swear I felt the cold brush of its breath on my skin, as it whispered something I still can forget. A single word, deep and guttural. Stay. I don't remember what happened after that. The next thing I knew, it was morning, sunlight spilling through my window, and I was curled up on the floor, shivering. From then on, I refused to sleep in that room. I begged my parents to let me stay in theirs, or on the couch, anywhere but upstairs. They agreed, though reluctantly, and we started discussing moving out. But even then, the activity followed us. Lights flickered, objects fell from shelves. Shadows stretched across the walls even when nothing was there to cast them. One night, my dad tried to put his foot down, insisting we couldn't live in fear of a draft and creaky boards. But right as he said that, every light in the house went out at once. A second later, the radio in the kitchen turned on by itself, blasting static so loud it rattled the windows. Over the noise, a man's voice screamed. Not words, just a raw, guttural scream that filled the house. When the power flickered back on, my dad didn't argue anymore. But the house wasn't going to let us leave so easily. The last straw came a week later. I woke in the middle of the night on the couch, the TV screen glowing faint blue in the dark. At first, I thought I'd just fallen asleep watching something. But then, I realized the TV wasn't playing anything. It was off, the screen reflecting only me, except it wasn't me. In the reflection, I saw myself lying there on the couch, and standing directly behind me, a tall, dark figure with glowing eyes, leaning down as though about to whisper into my ear again. I shot up, spinning around, and nothing was there. The room was empty, but the reflection lingered for half a second longer than it should have before blinking out. That was the night my parents finally agreed. We had to go. But leaving that house would prove far harder than we thought. We didn't waste any time after that night. My dad called a realtor the very next morning, and within a week, we'd begun packing boxes. But deep down, I think we all knew it wouldn't be that simple. A house like that doesn't let go. Whatever was in there had already attached itself, and it wasn't going to be happy about us leaving. The days leading up to our move were filled with activity. Shadows moved where they shouldn't. Cold drafts swept through the house, even when every window was locked. At night, doors opened and slammed so violently the hinges rattled. The smell, that thick, choking cigar smoke, it clung to everything, soaking into the fabric of the curtains, the carpet, even our clothes. 2 nights before the movers came, I was upstairs packing what little I still kept in my old bedroom. I wanted to be done quickly, but every time I tried, something distracted me. A knock at the window when I was on the 2nd floor, the sound of heavy boots pacing in the attic above. My hands were trembling so badly I could hardly fold my shirts. Then I heard it again, that guttural hum I'd first heard in the attic, seeping out from behind the walls, vibrating the air like a growl. The overhead light began to flicker, buzzing faintly, then cut out completely. I froze in the dark, clutching the half-filled box. That's when I felt it. A hand ice cold, pressing down firmly on my shoulder. I screamed and spun around, shoving backward into the wall. There was no one there, but the smell of smoke was suffocating. The air felt alive with static, like a storm was about to break. My mom came running up the stairs, but by the time she reached me, the light flickered back on. She tried to calm me, but her own face was pale, her eyes darting nervously to the corners of the room. We slept in the living room that night, all 3 of us, too afraid to be separated. The final night in that house is something I'll never forget. It started around midnight. I woke to the sound of furniture scraping across the floor upstairs. Heavy, dragging movements, like something too large to lift, was being shoved back and forth. My dad grabbed a flashlight and started toward the stairs, but before he reached them, every door in the house slammed at once. The bang was deafening, shaking dust from the ceiling. My mom screamed, and the flashlight flickered in my dad's hand before dying completely. Then the whispers began. Not one voice, not two, dozens. Layered over each other, rushing through the air. A storm of low mutters that seemed to come from every wall, every floorboard, every piece of the house. Some voices hissed, others sobbed, others laughed in a way that made my skin crawl. I clamped my hands over my ears, but it didn't matter. The sound was inside my head as much as it was outside. The TV in the corner snapped on, blaring static. The screen glowed, and through the haze of white and black, a shape began to form. A face. Hollow eyes, a gaping mouth twisted into something between a grin and a scream. The whispers crescendoed into a single, piercing shriek that rattled the glass in the windows. And then, silence. The screen went black. The house was still. But in that silence, I heard one thing clearly. A breath inches from my ear, followed by that same deep, guttural word it had spoken before. Stay. I bolted from the couch, dragging my mom with me, yelling at my dad to follow. We grabbed only what was nearest, coats, keys, nothing else, and stumbled out the front door into the freezing night. Behind us, the house groaned, every window vibrating, as though the whole place were alive and furious. We spent the night in a motel, none of us speaking much, our nerves frayed beyond words. By morning, when the movers arrived, we refused to go back inside. We told them to pack what they could and bring it out. When one of them asked why we weren't helping, my dad just muttered, "You'll see." The movers didn't last long. They hauled out maybe 3 boxes before one of them came running out, pale as a ghost, muttering that he'd heard a man laughing upstairs. They finished the job quickly, refusing to go back in alone. We left that house behind us, driving away without looking back. But here's the thing, I don't think it left us. For months after we moved, the same things happened, only smaller. At first, I'd hear the knocks late at night in our new home. My mom caught the scent of cigar smoke in the kitchen one morning. My dad woke up to find the radio in the living room turned on by itself, whispering static at 3 in the morning. And sometimes I wake in the middle of the night to see a shadow standing at the foot of my bed. Tall, broad, with glowing red eyes watching silently, patiently, as if reminding me of that single word, stay. I don't know if it ever really belonged to that house. I think it belonged to me. It's no matter where I go, no matter how far I run, it'll be waiting. They say houses don't haunt people, people haunt houses. But after what I've lived through, I know the truth is worse. Sometimes the house doesn't keep the spirit keeps you. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more true horror experiences, don't forget to like and subscribe for more chilling tales. And maybe, just maybe, check your mirrors before you go to bed tonight.